Okay, hello, Peace Corps, and anyone else that's watching. So today is going to be round 2 of this month's theme, which is classroom management. So today's topic is going to be classroom management tools. And it's basically going to kind of play off of last week's theme, which was positive discipline. So these are basically strategies and tools that you can use in the classroom and on a very practical level that are in line with the positive discipline model. Before we start, though, I just want to direct you to the chat on your screen. So on there, I've included the link to the presentation materials. Today's presentation materials will be there. The whole presentation that I'm doing will be there. Our Google Forum, where you can kind of participate in discussion, as well as our email for our curriculum team if you have any questions, and our website. So during this whole session, if you have any questions that come to mind, go ahead and type it in the chat. And at the very end of the session, I'll try and answer them, okay? I'm going to try to keep this one short and to the point. So basically, I'm going to be following the classroom tools presentation. If you go into the Google Drive, I'm basically going to be following session number 2, classroom tools. I'm basically just going to be going through the 10 different classroom tools, and then I'll discuss a little bit with some of the notes that I wrote down. Okay, so cool. All right, let's get started. So this is session number 2, classroom tool. The thing I'm going to be talking about here comes out of Positive Discipline in the Classroom by Dr. Jane Nelson. So this is actually going to be kind of a summary of chapter 8, which is classroom management tools. Okay, so if you, that's kind of the reference material. So you can always go back and take a look at that. All right, so I'm going to get started with basically the quote that the chapter starts out with. So the chapter starts with a quote by Rudolf Dreikurs, who helped put together the mistaken goals chart, which we talked about last week. But basically, the beginning of the chapter starts out with a quote. He says, "We constantly encourage or discourage those around us, and thereby contribute materially to their greater or lesser ability to function well." So basically, it talks about our ability to encourage students or discourage them in the classroom. And with that ability, we are able to contribute to them, to the students, and how well they're able to function in the classroom. So ideally, we want to do our best to encourage students and never to discourage them. Classroom management itself needs to be based on mutual respect, so that students have an opportunity not only to learn academic skills, but social, emotional skills as well. Right? Because the real world is not just a classroom, right? It consists of a lot more than just academics. So that's something that we really need to actively try and teach in the classroom. So this chapter adds some tools to your toolkit to help you ensure respectful classroom management throughout the day. So this means for you as a teacher to be able to practice respect in your classroom at all times. It will help your students understand what respect is and how to act respectfully. It's important, though, to note that no one tool is appropriate for every job. So it is important to have a variety to choose from, right? So I'm going to give you 10, 11 different classroom tools that you can use, but it's important to constantly update your tool belt, right? And to have a lot of options to choose from. No one tool is going to be kind of a savior for everything, right? You don't want to just stick to one thing. If one thing doesn't work, try something else, right? It's important. So the more tools you have, the more possibilities you have, and the more possibilities you have, the greater your chance of success, right? So with that, let's get started. Okay, so session number 2, if you go into the presentation, it has number 1. The first tool is limited choices. So difficult problems can be made easier to solve when choices are presented as solutions. So you can help your students succeed by offering an appropriate choice between at least 2 acceptable solutions. Okay, so the emphasis here is on appropriate choice between at least 2 acceptable solutions, right? It needs to be appropriate and acceptable. Okay, for example, you can tell your students, if you finish early, you may either read a book or write in your notebook quietly, right? So basically, you're offering the student 2 appropriate choices, and what I mean by acceptable is that you accept the student to like either choice is acceptable to you. So it's not like one is you prefer one over the other, right? Both the student really does have an actual choice, right, in this situation. So with this one, it's kind of thinking about what is appropriate for your students and how do you give them the option of choice that is acceptable to both you and the student. So for example, it is not appropriate to give students the option to, say, hurt others, right? For example, that's not an appropriate choice. It's not an appropriate choice to let your student just opt out, right? But it's also not appropriate to give broad range of choices to younger students. You can't say like, where do you want to sit? Or what do you want to learn today to a younger student? Because younger students really need to have limited choices, right? That are both appropriate and acceptable to you. So you can say like, you can sit at this table or you can sit at this table, right? You can give them two choices. That way, and as long as both are acceptable to you, the student has the real power to choose, right? Or you can give the option of, we can do our art assignment first or our math assignment first, right? Which one do you want to do first, right? Both are going to get done, but kind of like the order in which you do those activities can be left up to the students. With older students, you can give a little bit of a broader choices because their skills at making decisions and maybe dealing with consequences are a little bit more developed, right? So in that case, maybe you can give older students the ability to choose the topic that they want to talk about, right? Maybe still have a range of topics, but then they have more than just two choices, right? But all those choices still need to be acceptable to you as a teacher, and they need to be appropriate. Okay, so that's the first kind of tool that you can think about, giving students limited choices. Okay, let's move to number 2, classroom jobs. So this is kind of an interesting one. So assigning classroom jobs. So giving students opportunities to contribute in meaningful ways is one of the best methods to help students feel a sense of belonging and significance, right? Last week we talked about how all students need to feel a sense of belonging and significance. One way to do that is with classroom jobs, right? So doing assigned jobs gives students the satisfaction of contribution, and it helps you, the teacher. A good example is just creating a job chart that maybe rotates every week so that every student gets a turn, right? This one I think will require a little bit more language, right? A little bit more, you need to be able to establish this in your classroom. In America, when I taught in schools in America, I used classroom jobs in the classroom. And I think it wasn't too difficult for me to do it there. I think it might be a little bit more of a challenge in the English classroom here in Thailand. So maybe an idea is just to have rotating classroom helpers for each class. Or if you have students participate in activities, right? Don't always choose the same students, right? Definitely give everybody equal opportunity to participate. Ideally, the way this would look in that if this is run really well, like classroom jobs, an ideal situation would be to have students that basically have enough responsibility to kind of take over the class even if you're not there, right? So say, for example, a substitute teacher comes in, the students know their jobs, are able to operate and do their jobs without having to be constantly told how to do it, right? They know the schedule, they kind of know how the classroom operates, so that things kind of are run kind of by the students, right? A good example is the Bamboo School, right? Where they really put a lot of the jobs that go on in school into the hands of the students, right? And that gives them a lot more buy-in, right? It helps them feel like a sense of belonging, and it makes them feel significant, right? It makes them feel like they're really a part of the school or the classroom. And so something to consider definitely is classroom jobs, okay? Number 3. Okay, number 3 is one of my favorites, and it is act, don't talk, okay? So basically, you can act instead of talking. So when you say something, mean it. When you mean it, follow through with kindness and firmness, okay? Kindness and firmness. Or as drivers used to say to parents and teachers, shut your mouth and act, okay? For example, instead of asking again and again for the class to be quiet, just wait quietly for them to be ready, okay? So you're giving students the opportunity to kind of follow your lead, right? So something to think about is during the day when you're teaching, listen to yourself. and think about, and I think sometimes you might be amazed at how many, I guess, useless words you say during the day, right? Some things that you really don't need to be saying, but you kind of are lecturing and giving instructions where you don't need to be giving instructions. So if you decide to act more and talk less, I think your students will definitely know the difference. And I think as foreign teachers teaching in Thailand, I think we've definitely have had to do that more. We've definitely have had to act more than speak, right? But the key to this strategy or this tool is to guide students with kindness, firmness, and consistency. So you need to always be kind with your words. You need to be firm, and you need to follow through, right? It's important for you to follow through. So you can be kind and firm, but if you don't follow through, right, your students won't believe in what you're doing or what your expectations, right? So you need to hold students accountable for their actions. So being kind and firm doesn't mean that you let students go. You don't not hold them accountable for their actions, right? You still hold them accountable for their actions, but you make sure to do so respectfully, right? So you need to follow through. And follow through is a gentle way to guide students to do what needs to be done for their greater benefit, or to maintain respect for themselves and for others, right? So this one's a really great one, right? To really think about the way that you're acting and following through with your actions. Like, for example, if you say, like an easy one is just like no hitting in the classroom, right? And you see some student hit another student, you can go up and just maybe kindly remind them, right? Just by putting their hand down. Or if you see something happening, right, you can guide them, right? Say, for example, students are walking around the classroom, you can maybe just slowly guide them back to their seats, right? You don't have to say anything, right? But it needs to be done respectfully. And I think in a lot of ways, this one is one that needs to be consistent, right? And this is really kind of the opposite of lecturing and kind of always telling students what to do. Okay, so act, don't talk. Number 4, curiosity questions. This one really follows up with the last one, which is really talking about telling versus asking, okay? So too many teachers tell their students what happened, what caused it to happen, how they should feel about it, and what they should do about it. And they do it kind of lecture style, right? Which is kind of like you're lecturing the student about, like, you shouldn't be doing this. This is the way you should be doing it. Like you're telling them what to do, right? So instead of telling, teachers should ask and encourage students to solve problems for themselves. So a good example is, instead of telling students how to line up, ask how it's done and what it should look like. So another, I watched this video of a classroom teacher in the States talk about her classroom management. And she basically, during her first week of school, what she does is, say, for example, they have like a line, right? The students line up. She asks the students to line up. She actually doesn't tell them how to do it at first. She just has students do it, and to see what problems arise from it. So if there's students pushing each other, or students that maybe they're like rushing to see who's first, right? First sits them down and talks about, what happened? What are some issues that we had with it? How do you think we can make this better, right? Really including the students in the conversation of expectations. Because I think all students know like how a line should be made, right? And what they think is going to be most likely in line with what you think, right? So an easy example to utilize this into your own classroom is, if you have classroom rules, maybe to ask students, maybe ask them why you have these classroom rules and have them respond. Maybe if you say like, hands to yourself, please. Why do we have that classroom rule, right? Maybe give them an opportunity to respond and to think about why they have classroom rules instead of just enforcing the classroom rules and just having them, right? And when you tell instead of ask, but when you just tell students, right, and you don't ask their input and you don't ask them to think about it, you discourage students from developing their own judgment skills. You discourage them from developing consequence skills and accountability skills. You fail to give them the wonderful gift of seeing mistakes as opportunities to learn. So telling instead of asking also teaches students what to think instead of how to think, okay? So which is very dangerous in a society filled with peer pressure, right? So in a situation where you're constantly telling students what to do, they're no longer thinking about how they're thinking, right? They're thinking only like, you're telling me what I'm supposed to be thinking, so I'm just going to do that, right? And that can be dangerous. So whenever you're tempted to tell, stop yourself and ask instead. More often than not, respectful asking invites cooperation, which is something that we really want in a student-centered classroom, right? We really want students to cooperate with you, the teacher, in the classroom. But don't ask for students' perceptions and their opinions unless you are truly interested and you really want to help them learn to think and problem solve, right? Never follow an answer with a lecture, right? Say, for example, you ask them their opinion on something and you don't agree with their opinion, don't punish them for that, right? You're not there to like tell them what to think. You're really there to be open to what they're thinking and be open to their thoughts and what they think and how they think things should be done, right? And if they see you being open, then I think it's a good example for them to be more open as well. Okay, that's 4. Curiosity questions. Okie doke. Number 5, redirection questions. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So one of the best ways to redirect behavior is to ask questions related to the behavior that you would like to change. So for example, say students are being very noisy in the classroom and it's a little too loud and people are talking. You can just say, how many of you think it's too noisy for people to concentrate, right? Maybe raise your hand. How many of you don't think that, right? And it's important to ask the question in both ways in order to allow room for honesty, right? You want students to be honest in their responses, and you want them to understand that you're there really to listen and not to just control them and to navigate what kind of answer you want, right? So the question simply helps students become aware of what is needed in the classroom, right? So asking a question is usually enough to kind of invite students to think about their behavior and what needs to be done in that moment. And really, this is kind of something that needs to be built, right? Maybe the first couple of times it might be difficult, but when an atmosphere of mutual respect has been established, students usually want to cooperate in the classroom. And the question simply helps them become aware of what is needed in that classroom at that moment, right? And when students are kind of in this atmosphere where they want to cooperate and they understand that there's something that needs to be done about the situation, then usually a redirection question will help put them on the right path, right? Where you're not telling them like, it's too noisy, guys, you guys need to stop talking. Where you're kind of giving them the opportunity to kind of self-regulate, right? Which is super important, right? If you listened last week to like the stages of development, self-regulation is huge. It's really important on the pathway to respect, right? For students to be able to self-regulate. Okay, number 6 is also another one that I really like. This tool is called Doing Nothing, okay? And an effective tool for mutually respectful classroom management really is just doing nothing. An important part of respect and encouragement is honoring a person's right to control his or her own behavior. When teachers try to control students' behavior, they are being disrespectful toward the students. Even though adults are often disrespectful to children, they insist that children show respect to adults. And does this make sense? So try doing less reacting and more teaching and see what happens. So in this situation, this idea is basically that you should respect students' ability to control their own behavior, and it's not up to you to control them, right? It's up to you to control yourself. And when you try to control students, you're being disrespectful to them. And I think that's an important point to make, an important point to understand, right? So when you're teaching and you're trying to constantly put out fires, right? Things are happening and you're trying to like constantly react to every situation, then you're no longer teaching, right? You're just trying to control behavior. And I think at that point, you start losing a sense of why you're there and you start losing the classroom itself, right? The students start forgetting why you're even there in the first place. You forget why you're there in the first place, right? So in this situation, try sometimes doing nothing and see what happens, right? Try, instead of putting out fires, try really directing directing yourself in the way that you're teaching, right? And I think the next upcoming tools will help make this tool a little clearer, okay? So number 7, deciding what you will do, okay? Will we ever learn that the only behavior we can control is our own? Adults may be able to make children act respectfully, but we can't make them feel respectful. The best way to encourage students to feel respectful is to control our own behavior and be models of respect, both for ourselves and for others. Don't lecture. Just always make sure to follow through with firmness and kindness. So in this tool basically is directing your thoughts in terms of what is in your realm of control. Student behavior is not within your realm of control. No matter how much you'd like to think it is not. Student behavior is in the control of the students. What is within your control, what is within your own realm of control is the way that you act, your own behavior, right? So deciding what you will do. Deciding to do what to do instead of trying to control others may be a new idea, I think, for some teachers. But I think if you think of it in terms of being proactive, right? If there's a situation or a problem that occurs one day, don't react right away to it. You don't have to put out the fire right away. Because if you do try to react right away to it, you risk reacting to it in a way that is more harmful than good. So sometimes I think it's good if a problem arises in the classroom to take some time to think about it, to let your feelings not be in the control of the way you act, but give yourself time to really distance yourself from the action and try to figure out what you will do to solve the problem with kindness, firmness, and respect, right? And to make sure that you follow through with your decisions and see what happens, right? And don't be afraid to experiment and adjust things, right? You're not perfect. You are not there to be kind of the god of the classroom, right? You are somebody that's going to make mistakes. You are somebody that doesn't know everything, right? So accept that fact and allow your students to understand that fact as well, right? Sometimes you're going to be able to respond to the situation well. Sometimes you won't, but you have to be able to own up to your own mistakes and experiment, and don't be afraid to adjust, right? Admit to your mistakes, right? And change things that you think are not going well for you. And if you think something is not respectful, you as yourself, as a teacher, if you think you're doing something that is disrespectful to students, change it. Okay, don't get stuck in your ways and just bullhead your way through certain situations, right? Think about how you can teach your students through your actions. Okay. So this is a really important one as well, deciding what you will do. Okay. Number 8, saying no respectfully. So this one is kind of an easy tool, but it's also an important one. And basically, it's just the premise is it's okay to say no, right? If it's all you ever say, that's a problem. But some teachers don't think that they have the right to say no without a long, drawn-out explanation for their no. A firm, respectful no is sometimes all that is necessary, right? And it's actually can be somewhat disrespectful sometimes to explain to students what they already know, right? So I don't think everything always needs a long, drawn-out explanation. Sometimes if something is just common sense, you just say no. You want to play games at the beginning of class? Sorry, no. That's not something we never do that. Why suddenly today you want to play games at the beginning of class, for example, right? Don't allow students to manipulate you, right? Demonstrate kindness and firmness for yourself, for the students, and for the needs of the situation, right? So this is a simple one, but I think it's something that you do need to think about when you're teaching. Okay, number 9. This one is going to be a little bit more controversial, but I think is also something good to think about. So this one is putting everyone in the same boat. So teachers can sometimes pick on individual students as scapegoats to problems when the honest truth of the matter is that it is difficult to truly know all the players involved. Pretending that you have the ability to be judge, jury, and prosecutor is not practical. So when you put everyone in the same boat, you are not interested in finding fault or pointing fingers, but in getting the problem resolved. So ask those involved in a problem to figure out what to do, and then watch their creativity at work, right? So for example, 1 or 2 students maybe are whispering while others are doing work, right? You can just say, class, it's a little bit too noisy here. Let's bring it down a little bit, right? You don't have to say, you, be quiet, right? It can just be like, just kind of this general statement of like, let's bring down the noise level a little bit down, right? Without pointing fingers. Maybe if a student grabs another student's book and papers fly over the room, right? You don't have to make a big deal of it and like make it into a situation. You can just say like, can you please pick up the papers and let's get back to work, right? Just kind of take it in stride and not feel like you have to like prosecute people, right? Just kind of use the situation kind of just to move forward, right? And not feel the need to use individual names, and just put everybody in the same boat, not in terms of like saying everybody is the same, but just addressing it generally, right? So, and by doing that, you're saying basically that you're not interested in finding fault or pointing fingers, but really what you're interested in is getting the problem resolved. And I think that's really the idea you want to implant in the students, is every problem has a solution, right? And they need to be more focused on trying to find the solution than trying to point fingers and figure out whose fault it is, or blaming people, or just trying to find guilt. And I think that is more productive, right, in terms of the classroom environment. So yeah, that's 9. Putting everybody in the same boat. Okay, 10. This is a tough one, but a super important one in terms of positive discipline. This one I think I'm not exactly sure how this can be applied in schools here in Thailand, but it's something I think that we can all kind of think about. And if you have an idea, let me know, because I think this is a super great idea. Okay, so positive timeout. I don't know if you've heard about this, but this is a key component of positive discipline. So in positive timeout, the teacher reminds the student that feelings and actions are not the same, and that what we feel is never inappropriate, but what we do often can be, right? So really the idea is that we never want to blame students for how they feel. We never want them to feel ashamed for how they feel. We never want them to feel any guilt for how they feel, right? Because what they're feeling is always relevant, but what they do can sometimes be inappropriate, right? And in positive timeout, we want to involve students in creating a space that will help them calm down and feel better. Okay, and the opposite of positive timeout is punitive timeout. So punitive timeout may stop a student's misbehavior for a moment, but the benefits will only be short-term if the student decides to get even or give up. So let's kind of flesh it out a little bit more. So one key idea within positive discipline is that we all have times when, for one reason or another, we're not at our best. We're not behaving at our best, right? And in those situations, what we need is kind of a way to have a timeout for ourselves, but one that's positive and not punitive, right? Punitive timeout would be kind of what we're used to. It's where like, go over there and think about what you did, right? And it includes a component of like feeling blame, feeling ashamed for what you did. And it is a punishment, right? When you get put in timeout, right? They're like, think about what you did, right? And then when you're ready, come back and talk to me about it, right? That's punitive timeout. Positive timeout basically involves students in the creating process of a space that will help them calm down and feel better, right? And basically through this, you're teaching self-regulation, right? We're thinking about timeout not in the sense of punitive timeout, but for example, in sports, right? If you're playing a sport, you're like, timeout, we need to take a break and kind of just get back together, take a breather, right? It's not a negative thing, right? It's a positive thing. And so it involves students in creating the space, and it also invites students to name the space, right? So and the name needs to kind of dictate its purpose. So for example, it could be like the cool out space, or like the right, just kind of like something that's not like go sit in that corner, right? Where it's kind of like an inviting space, right? And using kind of like the limited choices tools, right? A teacher could ask a child like, what would help you best right now? To put this situation on the class meeting agenda, or would you like to go to the cool out space, right? Giving them the option of the cool out space. So allowing students to create the space, name it, and giving the option, right? Allowing them to choose a space as opposed to you punishing them to the space, it gives students ownership in the process. Right? So using a positive timeout teaches children the valuable life skill of taking time to calm down until the rational part of the brain is back in charge again. And this really goes back to what we talked about last week, which is, do you believe that in order to help students do better, we first have to make them feel worse, right? It's like when students have a meltdown in classroom, when they're upset, when things are just not going well for them in the classroom, they're already in a bad situation, right? They're already not feeling great. And to make them feel worse, I feel like is counterproductive, right? What we want is really to give them the opportunity to help themselves self-regulate and help themselves feel better. And this positive timeout idea really, really, I think, speaks to that, I think. And I think this is an awesome idea, right? Okay, so that's the 10th classroom tool. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to leave you with is kind of a tool, kind of just a little bit of like a piece of like obvious advice, I guess, which is to take small steps, right? The road to success is traveled one step at a time. The point of these classroom management tools is to teach students that mistakes are opportunities to learn, to give them life skills that will serve them when adults are not around, and to help them feel a sense of belonging and significance, so they don't feel a need to engage in non-productive, self-destructive behavior. So with that in mind, I think it's important for you to really maybe make your own list of tools, right? Keep a copy of tools and ideas and strategies that you have and put it down somewhere so that you can refer to them and think about them and really consider what you're doing in the classroom. In the Google forum, I put up a question that's asking about what are some classroom tools that you use that you think are effective. And I think it'd be great if you could go into that forum and just put down one thing that you think you do in that classroom and you think you do it well in terms of classroom management. And I think it will help you in terms of being able to think about that strategy, right? Think through that strategy and think through how could it be improved. Maybe, is it a good strategy, right? Even though it's effective, it might not be a respectful strategy. Or maybe it's a respectful strategy, but it's not effective for you in that situation, right? And I think it's important for us to really have this conversation because these are some of the classroom management really is what I think will shape our students in terms of the way that they develop socially and emotionally, right? So these are super, super important. And these are extremely relevant when it comes to student-friendly schools or student-centered teaching, okay? So I think continue to build up your toolkit, continue to learn, read up on things, research things. Don't be afraid to be wrong, right? And don't be afraid to question what you're doing in the classroom at all times, okay? Add your own non-punitive methods that will encourage your students and promote important life skills, okay? And remember, so this is kind of a quote that I put in at the very end of this presentation, helping students experience caring, belonging, and significance is the most powerful thing a teacher can do, motivating them to fulfill their highest potential, academically and otherwise. When students feel cared about, they want to cooperate, not misbehave. When they do not need to misbehave to gain attention and significance, they are free to learn. So I think this is just the core of everything, is really the job of the teacher is not to control students, is not really to teach a subject, but it really is to control yourself and to teach students, right? You're really there for the students, right? You're not there to give the students anything, but you're there to guide them, right? So you need to help guide the students to help them find themselves and help them experience caring, belonging, significance, right? So that they themselves can kind of create their own world and create and fulfill their own highest potential, not our potential, not the potential that will be put upon them, but their own potential that they have within themselves, right? So yeah, I promise to keep it pretty short. I think that is fairly short, right? 34 minutes. Any questions at all? Let's see. Okay, cool. See, Lauren put the breathing corner. I like that. Cool, cool, cool. Yeah, and yeah, so I think, right, Casey, you're saying that this applies to all of life and relationships. I think that's true. I think you can really apply this to more than just a classroom. The classroom is like an example of real life, right? A lot of these situations that we encounter, right? We don't want to take the classroom as something that's separate, really, right? We want to really allow students to have the experiences in the classroom benefit them in real life, I think, and help them to make choices later on. Right. And differentiating between feelings versus behavior, right? Feelings within yourself and the behaviors that you see students do, right? I think it's important to think about the human being, right? And not really so much the human doing, right? What is that person doing to make me upset? You're really focused on this person and how this person is valuable beyond their actions, beyond what you might not agree with, you know. And I think that's a great thing to think about in terms of real life too, right? Okay, cool. So I don't see any questions on this sidebar, but if you have any questions later on, you can just go ahead and just email the teachingpct@gmail.com. If you have my line or messenger or whatever, you can message me via that as well. Presentation materials are in the Google Drive. Check out the Google Forum. Check out the curriculum website. And that's it. Alrighty, cool. Peace out. Have a good, awesome week this week. See you later.